I want to begin by giving you an illustration from the mystical concept of Gilgulim, incarnations, reincarnations. I have a recollection that earlier in this series of classes I had a discussion with you about Gilgulim. I want to repeat it now as it relates to tonight's class. The way Gilgulim work is essentially as follows. You can either have a few very big ones or more smaller ones, or even more even smaller ones, or even more even smaller ones. That's the basic design of Gilgulim. And I'll explain it. Adam and Chava were two people. Adam and Eve, right? They were two parts of one whole. In the person of Adam and Chava, you had all neshamas, period. That means to say 600,000 times 600,000 sparks that could, in theory, become neshamas were included in Adam and Eve. That's 360 billion sparks of theoretical or potential neshamas. You know? Had Adam and Chava not sinned, way back when, and not eaten the tree of knowledge of good and evil till Shabbos, what would have happened? We would have remained cells, mystical cells in their bodies, and never been born. They would have existed forever, Adam and Chava, maybe Cain and Hevel, and that's about it. The purpose of the world would have been realized, and there would be simply no need for reproduction. There'd be no need to bring additional neshamas into this world, because the really one man fulfilled the whole purpose. Man was created, and the Gemara says he was created alone, because each man is a whole world. There was a certain purpose needed to be effected. Had Adam and Chava succeeded in carrying that through, that's it. Another world. Now, look at it any way you want. The good news is, they didn't. They failed. They didn't achieve that purpose. By the virtue of the fact that they didn't achieve that purpose, the purpose didn't change. But the materialization of that purpose, the realization of that purpose, became much more complicated. And whatever part of the mission they achieved is done. Whatever part of the mission failed to be done had to be done by subsequent people, and eventually by subsequent Jewish people. How does it work? Each aspect of Adam Erish represents one soul that has to do with one aspect of Adam Erish, and is correspondingly connected to one aspect of Adam Erish's purpose. So, because Adam Erish didn't achieve his purpose, those sparks were, so to speak, broken away, and they became complete. Instead of being just points in an earlier, greater soul, they flowered and they became independent souls. Still linked to the original soul of Adam Erish, but now newly created souls on a lower level, on a lower caste, and they have a smaller purpose, because they don't have to do all of Adam Erish's mission. They have to do only a portion of what Adam Erish's mission. If a subsequent soul, a breakaway soul from Adam Erish, fulfills its mission, that's the end of the party. If a breakaway soul from Adam Erish fails to fulfill the particular aspect of the mission it has from Adam Erish, the process repeats itself again. A soul breaks away from the secondary soul to create a tertiary soul, a third dimension of a soul, which is given a portion of the mission of what was the apportioned mission from Adam Erish. And this is how Gilgulim work. This is how Gilgulim work. The Kabbalah is Adam Erish has 600,000 root souls. That's the message. There's 600,000 principal souls, which of course are represented by the 600,000 Jews that left Egypt and went into the Holy Land, as described in Sefer Bamidbar, which we're currently learning. Once Adam Harishan failed, the mission that this one man had became a mission of 600,000. But Those 600,000 each were given, in effect, 1/600,000th of Adam Rishon's mission. Any one of those that fulfills its purpose does not reincarnate, doesn't produce lesser souls which are breakaway sparks from itself. Each one of those 600,000 souls has 600,000 sparks. They reproduce only as long as they need to. When a particular shlichus is achieved by a particular aspect of Adam Rishon's neshama, there's no more gulgulim from that spark. If a mission is not completely achieved, another layer of neshamas break away from the parent and are born, open up, develop, become complete, and do their portion of the original portion of the original portion of the original portion of the mission. If they complete their mission, there are no further Gulgulim. If they fail to complete their mission, there becomes a need for subsequent Gulgulim, and so on. The process repeats itself over and over again. The point is, there is actually a fixed end. Once the original mission that Adam Rishon needed to achieve is completed, Mashiach comes. It's called Soida Birudim, the mystical secret of bringing correction to the whole world. Adam and Chava could have achieved it in a couple of hours, and we've been achieving it for over 5,500 years. And it's been quite a difficult task. So, is it better to succeed or fail? It's a complicated question, and I'll tell you why. Because in the future, there's going to be Tchias HaMesim. Every single soul will resurrect with Tchias HaMesim. But let's say Adam Rishon's right shoulder fulfilled its mission first time around. So there was no Gulgulim from Adam Rishon's right shoulder except for the breakaway of the right shoulder from the body of Adam Rishon. So when Mashiach comes and Tchias HaMesim occurs, they will be represented by one person. Let's say Adam Rishon's left shoulder repeatedly failed. There will be thousands or millions of people representative of that spark of Adam Rishon's one unity. So is it better to succeed or fail? Those neshamas who succeeded in an earlier stage are going to be less represented in Tchias HaMesim. Those neshamas who failed in an earlier stage will be more represented in Tchias HaMesim. So is it better to succeed or fail? And the answer is, whatever happens is good. This is good because you have a purpose to achieve and you achieved it. This is good because the result of failure is a greater manifestation, a greater diversification, a greater variety, a greater representation. Less of neshamas, but more of them. This is really the concept of Gulgulim that we talk about from Kabbalah. The key point is, all of us come from one source, and we don't simply come back again. That idea is foolish. A Gilgul is not the same neshama coming back again. It's a spark of neshama breaking away and being created. And as a consequence, when Mashiach comes, they both exist. A neshama that did not need a Gilgul holds on to more of its sparks within itself, and it will be, and fewer parts of itself have the opportunity to open up and become new souls, and will be less represented in Tchias HaMesim. Of course, as the story goes, the way it is the way it's supposed to be. The Alter Rebbe once overheard a conversation between his friends who were discussing what they would do if they were God, and one said, I would be incredibly kind, the other one said to be incredibly draconian, incredibly exacting, and the Alter Rebbe interjected, and if I was God, I would do exactly as God is doing. So, this is really beyond comprehension, but the way it is exactly how it has to be. Those neshamas who fulfilled their mission completely in earlier eras and left no sparks, for them that was right. And those neshamas who failed to achieve their purposes and therefore produced the neshamas all the way to what we call the heel of Mashiach, ikves of the Mashiach, the lowest neshamas with the least capability, who have the smallest aspects of mission to achieve, to complete for earlier Gulgulim, and what we fully represented in Tchias HaMesim, for them that's the way it's supposed to be. So it's what is it, 6 of one or half a dozen of another, as it were, or 1 of one and 600,000 of another. That's the irony. When you think about this, your reaction can't be joy, it can't be sadness, it can only be awe. Because it's just a concept that makes you say, wow, that's interesting. Because it's either a win-win or a lose-lose. It's a win-win and a lose-lose. And it's all part of the Eibishter's design.
It's only win-win.
Ultimately, it's only win-win. But when you're sitting in Golos and eating your heart out, it doesn't feel like a win-win. Or when Tchias HaMesim happens and you're represented by one person who's a very, very holy tzaddik, and there are no nitzutzes from that tzaddik because he fulfilled his mission in one shot, everything has points of view.
Is it quality or quantity?
Exactly.
Well,
and the answer is
might
both.
Be better.
Quality is better and quantity is better. In Tchias HaMesim, it's always going to be about quantity. In the end, it's because we failed, there'll be more of us, and that's considered a good thing.
Why?
Because the Eibishter wants. Pru avum and lasa kipshur.
How many bodies? Each one can have his own body.
Right.
And to be different bodies with different neshamas.
With different sparks, right?
Sparks.
So it's in Hashem's interest for us to fail, that means, you're saying.
That's one perspective. That's one point of view. There are 2 points of view. Hashem told us what to do. We have to do what He said. No monkey business. Like I said to you, this is a question you cannot answer. To attempt to answer it is being biased. It's taking a side, which is wrong, because both sides are true. Why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you because we have been discussing over the last several classes the Beis HaMikdash. And the idea that the Eibishter's world has divisions. There are inner and outer planes. So we've been talking about the centricity of the Beis HaMikdash. The whole model or the design of the Beis HaMikdash is that there are divisions. Even though the world is a globe, and the very definition of a globe is that each point could be the top. Apitoida, it's not true. There is a center, there is a top, and that's the Beis HaMikdash, Likutei HaKadoshim. As I mentioned to you last week, Even Shetia, Shemen Hushtas Kol Ha'olam, the world was actually created from the Makam HaMikdash. And there are places which are closer to godliness and holiness, and there are places which are more distant from godliness and holiness. And the Kodesh HaKadoshim is the closest to Elokus. That's where the Shekhinah rests. And then, of course, the world is divided up into sections, castes. The most peripheral are the places which we call Gehenim and things of that sort. There are all kinds of Havdals, divisions. So there's order. Let me interject, just for the purposes of confusion, that as orderly as the Beis HaMikdash may have been, perfect order it wasn't. Because it comes after Chet Eitz Hadas. After Chet Eitz Hadas, after the original sin, there's not perfect order till Mashiach comes. Proof? Beis HaMikdash was destructible. What is the proof that the Beis HaMikdash was destructible? That it was actually destroyed. So as orderly as the Beis HaMikdash world, a world with the Beis HaMikdash at its center, was, the kind of order that existed before Adam and Chava sinned didn't exist. Nevertheless, for the most part, it represented an orderly model. There's a center. There's a place where the Shekhinah rests. Then the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. And we go off into Golos. And essentially, we are trading in, as you put it, quality for quantity. Last week, we described a world in a stalshus of worlds based on a more ideal model where there is a center, where there is a Beis HaMikdash, where things have an order, and so forth. Today, we're going to talk about the alternative. What happens when there isn't the Beis HaMikdash? And there's a chaos, there's a disorder, there's a golos, which really in the Tanya is represented by maybe 10 lines in chapter 53, where he talks about the idea that when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, wherever you have Dal Adam L'Shal Halacha, wherever you have a yeshiva, people study Torah and Paskin Halachas, the Shekhinah is present. But we're going to, using other sources, mostly the Rebbe's talks, develop a whole class on this, as I promised you. And I want to begin with the following idea. It says in Kabbalah that if you live in Israel, it is easier to believe in God than if you live in the diaspora. The techno language is, in Israel, the physical earth is sustained from energy that comes from Elam HaYetzirah. In Chutz La'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, Gazu al Gushav al Avira, you are living from an energy which is coming from Elam HaAsiyah. As a result, if you live in the Holy Land, it's easier to believe in God because you see divine providence more overtly. If you live outside of Israel, it's more difficult to believe in God because the Hashgacha Pratis is convoluted. It's become very difficult to understand it and to appreciate it and to interpret it and to see where the heaven is, where up is. And I'll put it to you in these words. In a perfect world, if you do good, you should have a good life. And if you do corruption and evil, you should have a miserable life. And that's not the case. Right? There is the age-old question, which the Sefer Eiv is all about, the book of Job. Tzaddik v'ra loy, the righteous who suffer. And the Rasha v'toiv loy, the evil who prosper. Now, this is of course a question which we're not going to resolve tonight or anytime soon. But one of the ideas which is brought in Sfarim is that in the times of the Beis HaMikdash it didn't happen. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash and the Yidden living in the Holy Land, it was Tzaddik v'Tovlei and Rasha v'Ralei. Righteous prospered and the evil felt the wrath of God, the consequences. One of the ideas which we recently had in Chumash, in last week's Pasha, in Pasha's Nasei, V'ishes Kadoshav lo yihiyu, says Rashi, if you don't give a tithe, you'll end up earning the tithe. If you're supposed to give 100 bushels to the Levi and you don't give it, you'll end up earning 100 bushels. In other words, the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the righteous saw immediate reward for their righteousness, and the evil saw immediate consequence for their evil. Why? Because in the Holy Land, when the Beis HaMikdash stands, the quote revelation of Hashem is more overt and more direct, and consequently, you can see how God's relationship with us is a reflection of our relationship with Him. When the Beis Mikdash is destroyed, and when you live in the diaspora, the Hashgacha is much more complicated, you're still Hashgacha Pratis, but to make sense out of it is very difficult, perhaps impossible, and as a consequence, it certainly seems to us like the righteous suffer and the evil prosper. One of the results of this is that since in the Holy Land, you can see the hand of God more overtly, God is more revealed, there's a higher expectation of faith. That's why in the Holy Land had the laws of the sabbatical, of Shemitah, and Yovel, and Hashmatas Ksafim Deiraisa. These are mitzvahs that any human being can only keep if you mamish believe that Panasa comes from Hashem. I mean, give a guy a $100,000 loan the day before Shemitah ends, and you know that when tomorrow the sun sets, he doesn't owe you the geld. And you do it because you believe that the same God who gave you the money will give it to you again. You'd have to be a Meshuggah or an unbelievable believer. Those mitzvahs don't apply in Chutz La'aretz. Hashem doesn't expect it from us. We have fewer mitzvahs, especially the mitzvahs have to do with emunah, because since the Hashgacha of Hashem is more convoluted, is more complicated, it's more difficult for us to see the hand of God. Therefore, Hashem's expectation of us, as we express our faith and behavior, is diminished. The alternative to this, another way of looking at this is, you have the famous Gemaras that the Zionists love to quote. They may not be religious, but they want you to be religious. That if you live outside the Holy Land, it's as if you have no God. Jews who live in the diaspora as if they're worshipping idols in purity. Now, what do these Gemaras mean? You have no God, you're an idolater. What does it mean? It means believing in God doesn't mean putting on tefillin. Believing in God means I make practical decisions based on the recognition that God is my master. So when I do something which is economically unfeasible, or even medically unfeasible, because God says to do it and I trust Him, that's having a God. But when you live in a world where you do all the mitzvahs, and you believe everything God says, but when it comes to a controversial point, like giving tzedakah, you say, well, I don't believe that much. That's called you don't really believe. Because in Chutz La'aretz it's much more difficult to believe in Hashem. Pashas greater Helen Behester. Godliness is more concealed. From a practical point of view, there's a lower expectation of Emunah. That's why, by the way, Shemitah was such a big deal in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says one of the reasons for the Churban was Shemitah. Because Shemitah, the sabbatical, was a mitzvah that went straight to faith. Because not to harvest every 7 years can only be practiced if you mamish believe that Parnasa comes from Hashem. And it's a hard mitzvah. We all understand that that's a hard mitzvah. In Eretz Yisrael, they were capable of and therefore expected to keep this mitzvah. We also have tests of faith. But we have lesser tests of faith because there's a lesser expectation, because Hashem is more concealed. So, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash is mystically much, much more than the breaking down of a house. It means that the Shekhinah is not revealed in this world any place. And I explained it to you last year, a body can't live without a head. The world without a Beis HaMikdash is like a headless body. How come we're alive? And the answer is we're attached by chains to the Shekhinah in the Beis HaMikdash of Asiyah Ruchnis, of a higher mystical world. As a consequence, the Hislapshus is complicated. In other words, the way we relate to the Shekhinah from a higher world is such that it's hard for us to make sense out of it. Hislap, the manifestation, the revelation. As a consequence, in Golus, it's much more difficult to see the hand of Hashem, the justice in Hashem's world, and so forth and so on. It's more than anything else a test of faith. That's the downside. What is the upside? The upside is what the Gemara says. The Jews were sent off into the diaspora to collect converts. So it says in the Kitzvi Harizal that this doesn't mean actual conversion of non-Jews to Jews. It means the elevation of the sparks. Every point in the world has godliness in it. What's called Nitzutze Kedusha, sparks of holiness. And they're trapped. And they need to be redeemed. And Yidden's going into the Golus is a mechanism, is a means by which we redeem all of these sparks, which would be impossible for us to redeem if we stayed in the Holy Land. So, is the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash a good thing or a bad thing? It's the same question. It's the same question as is it better to fulfill your mission in an earlier great Gilgal or to be reincarnated multiple times and produce whole new neshamas? It's apples and oranges. There isn't a right answer to that question. There's just a phenomenon. There's a reality. And the reality is that by going into Golus, we are being reduced, we're being diminished, we're losing our center. Or to say it alternatively, instead of there being a center, everywhere is the center in a microcosmic, in a tiny little way. So the upside is we're accessing sparks of Elokus which would never be retrieved had the Golus not occurred. But on the other hand, we're going into Golus. Just like the issue, the model with Gilgulim. Let me give you one example for this. Throughout our diaspora, we have built innumerable shuls and yeshivas all over the world, but Knesiyas and Batei Midrashas. The halacha is this is a matter of different shittas, but according to some opinions at least, every shul is mamish a piece of Beis HaMikdash. Those days, some days will hold that anytime you build a shul, you're fulfilling the mitzvahs. I say of Asul and Mitzvah. A shul is like building a portion of the Beis HaMikdash. It says in Chazal, Mashiach comes, every single shul will be physically moved to Eretz Yisrael and become attached to the Beis HaMikdash. And the understanding is that it won't only be the building. It'll be the earth, it'll be the ground, the terra firma, the earth on which the Beis HaMikdash is built will pick itself up and become attached to the Beis HaMikdash. The mysticism behind this is, when the Abishai created the world, he created a spot for the Beis HaMikdash. Some of the parts of that spot have been scattered all over the world. Pieces of the Beis HaMikdash, pieces of the ground of the Beis HaMikdash have been placed all over the world. The following I didn't see in Svan, this is my personal opinion. I believe that this is only after Chet Eitz Hadas and not before. But this is a personal opinion. I never thought this word anyway. When a Yid builds a shul, He's not creating a Beis HaMikdash. He's discovering one. Where a house of God is built means that that place inherently, innately, from itself, was actually originally a part of the Beis HaMikdash. And when Mashiach comes, those places return to their rightful place in Eretz Yisrael, adjacent to the Beis HaMikdash. You don't go to that place, you don't build that Beis HaMikdash, you don't retrieve that land. So this is just a very specific example of the greater idea of going to the various places in the world and retrieving sparks. So let's ask the obvious question, right? Now this may sound very ironic, but, quote, God forbid, end quote, if we survive in Eretz Yisrael, and we do what Hashem wants, and the Beis HaMikdash is never destroyed, all these sparks are lost. All these potential shuls are never built and never retrieved and booked at Yisrael. Right? What's the answer to that question? So it says in Svarim, it says in Chassidus, it says in Kabbalah, that when the Yidden lived in Eretz Yisrael, there was an incredible light, very potent, very powerful light, that drew sparks to itself. That the sparks, wherever they may be, came to Eretz Yisrael without us having to go to those locations. The example which is cited to illustrate this is the pasuk Malkas Shva Sham Oshem Ashleim Evatav Yerushalayim. It says in Divrei Hayamim, in Chronicles, that the Queen of Sheba came. She heard about Shlomo HaMelech and she came to Jerusalem. So it says in Savarim that Malkas Shva was the Liyum Hazeh. She was the counterpart. She was the opposite of Shlomo HaMelech. Right? Just like Yossi was the opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu. She was a brilliant woman. She was the opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech's mission in this world was, amongst other things, in quotes, to elevate her. He didn't go to her. She came to him. Because it was the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and it was the brightest time of the Beis HaMikdash. The light from the Beis HaMikdash shone, and it reeled in the sparks. So if there's no destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the sparks are brought in without us having to go to those places. However, not all the sparks get elevated. Only the brighter sparks get elevated. The really, really dull sparks, the lowest sparks, what we call pacham ktanim, the small jogs, or the things that people of our generations are busy with, in the very ends of the Golos, those sparks would not be reached by that bright light. So again, you're trading in less of more for more of less. So when you have a Beis HaMikdash, and you have a center, so the light of the Eibishter is in one spot, and it's bright, and there are divisions. There are holier places and less holy places. I mentioned to you last week the Mishnah, Asada Kedusha, it's all divided up into 10, 12, the levels of holiness. There's order. When the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, although the spot of the Beis HaMikdash still has the sanctity, that center is lost. And instead of having a center where the Shekhinah rests and from which light shines to the whole world, it's replaced by a different model, where the sparks are all over the place, the Yidden are all over the place. Any place Yidden build a shul, any place Yidden build a yeshiva, Dalad Am Shal Halacha that ever brings. Any place where Yidden gather together and pass on halachas, a small portion of the Shekhinah that was centered in the Beis HaMikdash, entirely in one place, is found in each yeshiva, in each place where you have a Beis HaMikdash, a yeshiva, and so on and so forth. And it accomplishes what the Beis HaMikdash accomplished, in part, in a reduced way. This is the Golus model. This is the Golus model. And of course, the way it works is that in earlier periods of our exile, we elevated greater sparks, and as the Golus proceeds, we dealt with the greater sparks, and we're dealing with lesser and lesser sparks. In other words, as the Golus deepens, the sparks that we have left to elevate, the missions that remain are smaller and smaller. And as a consequence of this, souls in later and later generations are lesser and lesser, because since the mission is smaller, the power that we need to achieve those missions is correspondingly diminished. In addition, the Rebbe explains in one of his sichos that in the time immediately following the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Jewish people settled in lands closest to the Holy Land, and as the Golus progresses, we are scattered further and further away from Eretz Yisrael to more distant places, because the presumption is the areas closest to Eretz Yisrael and closest to Har Sinai have the greatest holiness, The lands furthest away have the least holiness. So the lowest and the most remote is left for last. In fact, the Rebbe has a letter. The previous Rebbe wrote the Rebbe a long letter. The Rebbe wrote, our Rebbe wrote the previous Rebbe a letter. It says, Shamai Tishmu, I heard a rumor that the Alter Rebbe once said that the Torah wasn't given in America. We all know when the Torah was given, it was given to the whole world. Even though it was centered in one spot, it was given to the whole world. So the Rebbe says, I heard a rumor that the Alter Rebbe said that the Torah wasn't given in America. So there's a whole long letter. It's very concisely represented in one of the passages in the Hayom Yom, where he explains that there's truth to that. It's partial truth to it. Since America is so far away, according to the Rebbe once said, according to Torah, America is considered an island.
A what?
An island, even though of course it's a continent, because it's not attached to the landmass of Africa and Eurasia, where Har Sinai is, that Israel is. If it's separated by water, it is from a mystical perspective an island. In other words, remote, far away. And this is the reason why Jewish people came here so late. And the Jews who come here have such low souls, because what's remaining at the end of time is the last sparks. That's the way it works. And there's another interesting aspect to it as well. In the 1880s, it's a long time ago, over 120 years ago, the Rebbe Rashab, the previous Rebbe's father, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, made a statement, quote, Ein itanu yodeya admo b'seid habirudim. We no longer have clarity about the mystical secret of elevating sparks. What this means, in other words, is as follows. Every person who enters this world has a mission. And from a mystical perspective, using strictly Kabbalah language, their mission has to do with certain sparks. Great Kabbalists not only knew their own mission, but they could tell you yours. People would go to tzaddikim and find out, what should I do with my life? And the answer that they were given was not only based on pragmatic considerations, it was based on Sheiresh HaNeshama, the source of one's soul, and why one was created. We have the great story of the Alter Rebbe's Hasidim, one of the greatest Goinim in the world, never worked a day in his life. In his 70s, began to drive a coach for 2 years to save one Jewish soul, and that's why his Neshama came into this world. It's just called the secrets of Birudim. So the Rebbe Rashab said, we no longer know these secrets. We don't know the secrets of Birudim. But it's not because the Rebbe Rashab is a smaller tzaddik than the tzaddikim who came before, and therefore he's not sensitive to the mystical correlations or associations between a person and a mission. It's because what remains from Birudim at the end of Golus is so minuscule, is so small, it is impossible to know which neshama is linked to which spark. And therefore he proposed in 1887, Chatei v'achel, chatei v'ishti. An opportunity comes to you to do a good deed, do it. It may be your spark. We no longer can decide, well, this is for me, and this is for me, and this is for me. In times of the Baal Shem Tov, times of the Alter Rebbe, you came to a Rebbe, told you what your birur was, told you what your mission in this world was. Usually it made sense, and sometimes you got an interesting answer. We're living in an age that because we're so close to Mashiach, and we're so far away from holiness, we are dealing with such minuscule, such minute sparks that it is impossible to know which spark belongs to which soul. So we're encouraged, do what you can, and the Eibush should help, and you'll come to the right sparks, and collectively we'll finish the mission, and we'll be Mashiach said King. This is how we understand the alternative to the Beis HaMikdash model. To say this in different words, the Beis HaMikdash is never destroyed. It's just dispersed. If the Shechina, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, is in one place, now it's in 1,000 places, or in 10,000 places, in every shul, in every yeshiva, in every place where they pass in halachas. You have the Shechina in a diminished, in a partial way. The Rebbe says in the Sikha, a bigger shul, more mispalalim, a bigger piece of the Shechina. A smaller shul, a smaller group of people, a smaller piece of the Shechina. And there's the controversy about where is it better to daven, in a local shtibel or in a big fancy shul. It's a controversy, and this is part of the insight. That's the meaning of Berei V'am Hadras Melech. More Yidden, you have more of the presence of the Shechina. So it's not like you lose the Beis HaMikdash, but its order, its seder, what we would call in Kabbalah language, its tikkun is entangled temporarily, and in the short term things are all over the place, and this is the explanation for Golus. In other words, Plan A will be seen through. Plan A has evolved. Since Adam Rishon's original plan, what the Eibishter wanted Adam and Chava to accomplish, we will accomplish. But it can be achieved very neatly, it can be achieved semi-neatly, and it can be achieved in a major mess. And that's the option we've basically been left with, by our own choices. So the same idea that we described last week, with the center of the world is the Beis HaMikdash, and the Shekhinah, the Beis HaMikdash has inverse windows, and the light of the Shekhinah rays to the whole world, and that whole model still exists, but it's confused. It's called toyu, it's called disorder, it's called the opposite of tikkun. The downside of it is the helam, the lack of revelation of the Eibishter. The upside of it, however, is that since you're going to where the sparks are, you're going to be retrieving such tiny little sparks that if they were to be a Beis HaMikdash, those sparks would never get their chance to be elevated. When we're finished, Mashiach comes. What does Mashiach mean? Mashiach means reordering the Eibishter's world, to go back to the world ultimately as it was before the original sin. Complete order. And order means divisions. Order doesn't mean there's holiness all over. Order means there's a concentration of holiness in the Beis HaMikdash. There's a lesser concentration of holiness in Yerushalayim. There's a lesser concentration of holiness in Eretz Yisrael. And there's a lesser concentration of holiness in Chutz La'aretz. However, when we finish disentangling the confusions that were created by Golus and by Avedis and by the lack of overt revelation of the Eibishter, things become reorganized, become reordered. And ultimately, Chassidus teaches us that when you have order, when things have a place, you can reveal the deepest levels of godliness. In other words, there's an argument that says that in times of Golus, when everything is confused, you can find infinity in the strangest places, and that's true. We call that tshuva, right? There's only one requisite in order to be able to do tshuva, which is that you first have to do an aveda, which is a bad thing. But there's another argument also that says that when things are exactly as they're supposed to be, the deepest level of godliness is revealed. So, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, we had a considerable amount of order. In times of Golus, we have an incredible amount of disorder. When Mashiach comes and things are brought to a complete state of order, the deepest revelation of the Eibishter will be manifest. I will illustrate it to you in the following fashion. There is a famous Rambam, famous for more than one reason, who says that a person should walk in the middle. A person should go b'derech hamitzvah. A person should choose what's called the middle path. Now, like everything else that the Rambam says, it is brilliant, simple, and terribly abused. There's so many interpretations of that. The Rambam, everybody uses the Rambam, of course, to serve their own preconceptions. First, you know what you believe, and then you prove it from the Rambam. Such as a person shouldn't be too religious. There's a centrist philosophy that says don't be too fanatic, and the proof is the Rambam. It's not the Rambam's intent. I don't want to start defending the Rambam. Doesn't need my defense. What the Rambam is really saying is that the middle is not a compromise. The middle is the absolute truth. But not everyone can afford to walk in the middle. For example, we had last week's Pasha, the story of Saita and the Pasha of Nazir. And the Gemara says, Rashi brings it in Chumash, that when a person is vulnerable to sin, when a person is weak, and of course, the surest basis for vulnerability to sin is prior failure, right? Nobody is more vulnerable to sin than someone who has sinned already. So the Chazal say, if you have a vulnerability, if you have a predisposition, or you have predisposed yourself to sin, you have to take an extreme. The Gemara says, if you tell a Nazarite, don't go anywhere near a liquor store, walk on the other side of town. Why? I'm not walking into the liquor store. Don't go near it. If you have vowed not to drink wine, don't tempt yourself. Don't go anywhere which is remotely associated with the liquor store. You don't need the temptation. Why not? Because you're vulnerable. A person who doesn't have that predisposition is told, well, you can drink wine. You're not going to abuse it. Drinking wine in moderation is not only acceptable, but it's a good thing. God created wine for us to use, to serve Hashem with joy. But a person who has a vulnerability in that area must take an extreme. And the same is true in everything. So walking in the center is an ideal state of existence. To walk in the center means you've never stepped off the line. Because if you step off the line to the left, the only way to compensate for that is to step off the line to the right. So a person who has sinned, in areas where they have sinned, they can't be in the center. They've taken extreme. A person who hasn't sinned can afford to walk in the middle. So the Rambam says the central path is the truth. Don't do anything wrong and don't need to compensate. So the Chassidus explains, when a person succeeds in walking in the center leads you directly to Pnimiyas V'Atzmas Ein Sof. Which means to say, in other words, even though so much of what you learn about in Chassidus celebrates tshuva, you reveal infinite lights which have to do with sin. Because you made a mistake and you're corrected, you're revealing infinite lights. Which in context would mean we're celebrating Golus. We made mistakes, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we went off into Golus, but we're elevating sparks and revealing what's called in Kabbalah language, Sevav Kalalmim. But walking in the center, which where other Machava should have done prior to the original sin, brings you directly to Atmas Lamhuz, to the very face of God, the essence of God. The long version of this is not for right now. And when Mashiach comes, that's going to be the state of the world. The world is going to be completely corrected. On the one hand, the diaspora is going to lose all its sparks. Every spark of holiness was removed from wherever it is. Every Beis HaMikdash, every shul, wherever it may be, is going to be transplanted and placed in Eretz Yisrael. So the Eretz Ha'amim, Chutz La'aretz, seems to be suffering. You're taking away whatever good it has. On the other hand, you're giving the world an order. And when the world is in a perfect state of order, the very, very bottom, it's like the difference between a sick person and a healthy person. Sick people deal with the vital organs. They keep them healthy. They overcompensate. A healthy person can worry about his nails and his hair and his skin. It's a healthy world. Or to use on Maimon Chazal, the Chazal say that the Beis HaMikdash will expand to occupy all of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim will expand to occupy all of Eretz Yisrael, and Asida Eretz Yisrael shetispashet b'chol ha'arotzos, and Israel will expand to occupy all of the world. But that doesn't happen until the entanglement and the confusion is organized. In other words, we fix, we compensate, we correct all of the mistakes. Everything is put where it's supposed to be, and then walking in the center, everything reaches Atmas Lamhuz Baruch, reaches the essence of the Eibshter. So the same idea that we described about the Beis HaMikdash and the times of the Beis HaMikdash, that there's a center, and everything gets life from the center, and the Torah mitzvahs that we do go into the center, and so forth and so on, happens in a different model in the times of Golus. And when Mashiach comes, everything is retrieved and reorganized and brought back to where it needs to be in Eretz Yisrael. So as I told you at the beginning, tonight's class is almost in its entirety not in the Tanya. There's just a short mention of it in the Tanya, but I felt that it was worthwhile to give you the other version of the way it's described in the Tanya. The Tanya is describing the Shekhinah being in the Beis HaMikdash. And through Torah and mitzvahs, the Shekhinah is able to shine to the whole world. So there is that idea in the times of the Beis HaMikdash where the Shekhinah has a distinct center. And it's true in Golus also. The Shekhinah is in every place where there's Torah. Oyev ad Hashem sharei tziyim. Da'al d'Amos shel Halacha, where Yidden learn and daven the Eibishter is. And when we do Torah and mitzvahs, we bring, although a diminished, but still a revealed aspect of the Eibishter Shekhinah to the whole world. And Mashiach means finishing with the disentangling of the confusion and bringing everything back where it needs to be in Eretz Yisrael and the Beis HaMikdash and so forth. I want to finish the class with the story and a point. The Heilige Baal Shem Tov, the holy Baal Shem Tov, had a Talmud whose name was Avov Kitzis. Avov Kitzis. He was Mustama Tzadik Gomer, a Tzadik for sure. In other words, don't try to study him using Freudian methods. He's talking about a different kind of person altogether. Avov Kitzis, like many tzaddikim, had a great longing for the Holy Land. He wanted to live in Eretz Yisrael. Chazal say, Avila Eretz Yisrael, Machkim, the land of Israel gives wisdom. The Gemara also says that if a person is buried in the Holy Land, they're not going to have tzara de mechilas, they're not going to have to creep under the ground when Ches Amazing happens. And finally, the Gemara also says it's a better idea to go there alive and die and then be buried than to be carried there after you pass away. There's a difference between those two. So there's many reasons, the Gemara says, there's many reasons why people who were more spiritually sensitive and astute and focused wanted to live in Eretz Yisrael. So he too wanted to go to the Holy Land. But he had a Rebbe, which is a very important thing. And without a Rebbe, you don't do anything. So he came to his Rebbe, to the Heilige Baal Shem Tov, to ask him for permission to satisfy this wish of going to live in the Holy Land. And the Baal Shem Tov told him not to go. So he waited a year, and he came again. And he told the Baal Shem Tov, last year you told me I shouldn't go to Eretz Yisrael, perhaps now you'll allow me to live to resettle in Eretz Yisrael. And the Baal Shem Tov told him no. This went on for a number of years. But he really, really wanted to move. And his Rebbe was not changing his mind. So he decided on an alternative tactic. He's not going to come to the Baal Shem Tov and ask him permission. He's going to come to the Baal Shem Tov and inform him, I'm going to live in Eretz Yisrael. And ask for a blessing. If the Baal Shem Tov was not even given a blessing, then he'd say, okay, this is too risky. But if he would get the blessing, or as you put it, the blessing is there anyway, then he would go. There was a custom in those days that when people undertook any long journey, which could last weeks, you wanted the journey to have a Shabbosdika spirit, a Shabbosdika blessing. So Friday afternoon, you would travel out of town, and you would travel just beyond the Tchum, so far from the city that you could halachically not go back into the town, and stop, and spend Shabbos on the road. What this affected was that the journey had a Shabbosdika beginning and was therefore considered auspicious. So Avov Kitzis comes to Mezhebush, to the Holy Baal Shem Tov, on Friday morning. With his wife and his family and his belongings and his wagons. He's on his way to Israel. He's going to spend Shabbos on the outskirts of Mezhebush. But right before he goes, he's getting the Rebbe's blessing. He comes into the Baal Shem Tov, and of course there's always the chance Baal Shem Tov is going to say, don't you go or else. And he says to the Baal Shem Tov, Rebbe, I am coming to inform you that I am moving to Israel and I'm coming for your blessing. So the Baal Shem Tov looks at him and says, I will not only give you a blessing, I will grant you permission to do this. With a condition. This Shabbos be in Mezhebush. Start next Friday, your trip. Man was ecstatic. He was elated. All of these years he's been asking his Rebbe for permission, he can't get it. And now that he, so to speak, tricked his Rebbe, I give you permission. It's going to cost him a week, that's all. So he runs out to his wife and he tells his wife the great news, and they're all very thrilled. They travel into Mezhebush, they find themselves a place to stay, and they spend Shabbos. Friday afternoon, the Baal Shem Tov calls Avov Kitzis. And he tells them, come, I'm going to the mikveh, I want you to go with me. Mekubalim, big tzaddikim. A mikveh is a great spiritual journey. And when they're in the mikveh, the Baal Shem Tov tells Avov Kitzis, you immerse yourself first. And Kederach HaMekubalim, as was the tradition of the Kabbalists, he toivel with his eyes open. And those days there was enough vitamin D and there was no chlorine in the water. Beta minus. Anyway, he tovels. The Avov Kitzis tovels. And he comes up and he says to the Baal Shem Tov, I'm not moving there to Israel. And the Baal Shem Tov looks at him and says, I don't understand. You've been harassing me all these years to move. I never let you. I'm finally giving you permission. And now you're backing out of the deal. He says, Rebbe, I put my eyes under the water. And I saw my journey. I watched myself travel. I traveled through Europe, through Central Europe, into Turkey, down to Constantinople, Istanbul. I got on a ship and I traveled to Haifa. I got off the ship. I kissed the holy ground and I traveled to Jerusalem.
How long was he under the water?
I traveled to Jerusalem. came to Yerushalayim, was called in Halacha Tzoifim, which means you could see the Harabayas. I rent my garments, I tore my clothes for the Chod Mabayas, I kissed the ground, and I started running towards what's called Shirid Beis Mikdashenu, the Kesel Amarabi, the remnant of the Beis HaMikdash. And lo and behold, I see a full functioning Beis HaMikdash. There's no destruction. There's no destruction. All four walls, everything is in order. I walk in, there's Kayanim and Leviim and Israelim, Kayanim, Bavidosim, and Leviim, Duchanim, Yisrael, Mamadim. In my vision, the Beis HaMikdash is standing and everything is perfectly in order. And they were thrilled to see me. They greeted me with such joy. And I took a tour. I marched through the Beis HaMikdash. And wherever I went, I saw the Beis HaMikdash as it stood in the Zman HaBayis. And I went deeper and deeper and deeper until I entered into the Holy of Holies, went to the Kodesh HaKadosh. And the Holy Ark was absent. The Holy Ark was absent. The Kodesh, the Aron HaKodesh was missing. So I asked, if on some level the Beis HaMikdash exists and it functioned, how come the Aron HaKodesh is missing? So I was told, the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark, the Aron HaKodesh is in Mezhebush. The Holy Ark is in Poland by the Baal Shem Tov. So he says, Rebbe, it's a very powerful story. And it illustrates an idea which Rebbe spoke about, which says as follows. The Aron HaKodesh represents the Torah. The Torah goes with us into the Golus. Wherever Yidden are, the Torah is, that's the Aron HaKodesh. But the Rebbe brings a series of Gemaras, Rayas from Gemaras, that say that there is one place where you have the Tzaddik Ador, the Nasi Ador, and where he is, there's a Lashon HaGemara, Tmuras Mikdash HaGadol B'Yerushalayim. There is a presence which is similar to the presence that was in the Beis HaMikdash. It's obviously concealed, right? In the Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara says, Kshem Shebol Leroy Kach Balidas. You went to the Beis HaMikdash, you didn't only were seen by Hashem, but you actually saw him, right? If you meet the Baal Shem Tov, you believe that the Shekhinah is with him, you don't see it. But nevertheless, there is such a concept that there is certain people where the Shekhinah is present like it was in the Beis HaMikdash. The Alter Rebbe said, the Hillel Parasha quotes Alter Rebbe who said that there are certain Jews for whom the Beis HaMikdash was not destroyed. For example, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now anybody who knows the life of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai knows his life was not a bowl of cherries. He spent 13 years in a cave. But his experience of godliness was equal to the experience of godliness that existed in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. And this is another aspect of this idea that when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, the Shekhinah doesn't go away. It's just more concealed and more scattered. And Mashiach is going to come. We're going to have the same order, not just as existed in the times in the first and second Beis HaMikdash, but we're going to have the same order that was before Adam and Chava sinned. And that's why we say that the third Beis HaMikdash is indestructible, it can't be destroyed. Because if the world is in a perfect state of order, it cannot be pushed out of orbit, it cannot be made chaotic, disorderly again. And just to add one final thought, in case I haven't given you enough information, the Rebbe has a number of brilliant lamdish sichas, nigla sichas, where the Rebbe addresses questions about changes in the world that affect a change in the Torah. And he asks, if Torah is eternal, how could the world change and therefore affect a change in the Torah? And he explains that sometimes the world becomes disaligned. The world doesn't match the Torah. And when the world doesn't match the Torah, not everything written in Torah practically applies in this world. But it has to do with disorder and chaos. Mashiach is going to come. Everything in this world is going to mirror exactly the way it's written in the Torah. And that's why only when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to keep all of the mitzvahs perfectly, because there'll be a perfect alignment between heaven and earth. And let me just say, in conclusion, though this class was to a great degree not the Tanya, but it marks the end of our learning of Likutei Amarim, Sefer Shel Beinanim. It's a great milestone, Baruch Hashem. And for those of us who have been here throughout, more power to us. And Bili Neder, next Monday we're going to start the Shara Yichad Ve'emun.